Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Blabbit. Blabbit's where we bring esteemed experts in their fields and ask them some questions so that maybe you can get some answers for yourself. Feel free to log in and ask any questions you would like. For those who are for the first time, my name is Glenn Ingram. I've been working on and helping others with their communication and their listening skills so they can be better influencers and work in the sales arena for the last 2 decades. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Glenn. It's good to see you, and we'll get to our esteemed returning guest in just a moment. But I do want to mention, as we normally do in these episodes, that Blabbit is brought to you by Open Doors. We are sponsored by Open Doors and have been for the last couple of months, which is a wonderful and beautiful thing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking and presentation coach out of New York City. And I work on three main things, and that would be removing any speech habits that get in the way, making sure that people are speaking with clarity, and also mitigating physical responses to public speaking anxiety. Ooh, we all know what that feels like when we're in the spotlight. Hey, Wendy, it's great to see you again. For anybody who hasn't seen you on Blabbit before, please give them a little bit of a bio about you.
Happy to. Good morning to both of you. It's a treat to be back on Blabbit. Really appreciate this forum, and I've used it to learn. So thank you for putting out your videos. That's very, very useful. My name is Wendy, as you said. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and my work in the world is around repairing and strengthening trust in groups. It's been my research area and my practice, and it brings me a lot of joy to work with groups and help them figure out what they can do to strengthen their relationships and their ability to work together. So happy to be here today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, I wonder when you're working with these groups to begin with, and maybe, we've had a lot of transition over the last year or two with what Paul always loves referring to as the Great Resignation. So how much are you seeing the old adage being true? You only have one chance to make a first impression when you're joining a new organization, and it's really going to dictate what you're going to do and how those relationships are going to transpire as you move forward.
I think I think it's a yes and response. Yes, I really believe that adage plays true. I do believe that first impressions are there and they stick around. And the and part is I believe that organizations right now are so conscious about finding talent that they may forego that first impression and continue maybe for a second interview or go and have questions with, when we do the phone calls to previous employers and things like that background check. That can also paint the picture. So I think people have more than one chance. And I do believe then that it's the option of the individual to show the talent and the skills and the mindset and the style that they bring to that organization. I think that's really important to check into. I also believe that really matters when you're trying to find the right fit, both from the individual perspective, but also from the group, because that matters in strengthening relationships and trust.
Now, it's really interesting that already we're delving into a subject that I talk about quite a bit, which is interview skills, both the skills of the interviewer as well as the interviewee. We often think in terms of, well, I want to make sure I make a good impression. But isn't that true of the interviewer as well? And really what you're touching on is the ability, certainly, of the interviewer to be able to make the interviewee comfortable so they get a good sense of how they're going to fit or not going to fit culturally. And it's not all about skills. Very often the skill set is already delineated on the resume, but then it becomes a matter of drawing some of that out. So let's just stay on that subject for just a moment.
Sure.
Are there any areas, general questions that you would ask that lead to responses that give an indication of trustworthiness of a potential candidate? Is there anything that comes to mind, anything that you've experienced I realize that you work a lot with existing relationships,
Sure.
but this is interesting that we're starting off with new relationships and building from there. Nice.
I like that, Paul. And I'm glad we're playing with this subject. I've had some conversations with some clients recently, some coaching of some leaders who are so desperate to fill some spots that I sent them some recent Harvard Business Review articles and a couple of other sources and said, look, I know you're hungry to fill those positions, but don't be too hungry to find someone that it's not going to be the right fit. So some of the questions that were suggested in both some of those recent articles, and I have a whole list of questions that I'm constantly sharing with people. And I love sharing them with like college students and people trying to enter into the workforce, because they're all questions that ask people to describe how they did something. And so I would actually look at the nature of the job, and I would find 4, 5, or 6 different types of deep, open-ended questions where they can't say, yes, I have experience or not. I want them to describe a time when you had a challenging situation with a coworker and you felt that you were in the right. You know, I'm really trying to paint, just say, tell me about a challenge, right? I really want to paint it a little bit more when someone might feel maybe a little bit more indignant about this is the way it needs to be. How did you work through it? Because we are going to have those pinch points. And if people don't have the skill base to work through that, to listen, and we don't do that very well right now. I don't think that there's many of those examples on many stages. We don't see that playing out well in the media that we watch, right? Shows. It's just easier to find a joke or to, send someone off the island, or we just we just paint them in the other now and we stop talking. We can't do that in business and in organizations. So I would ask questions like that. I would ask them to describe how they went about it. And then I'm looking for how they're learning over time. I want to see development. So I'm going to ask specific questions, not just about how they're applying skills in a model. I want to see how they're taking in information and letting it change them somehow.
Every answer rather to those questions should really be about process and about adaptability and openness to learning. So really those are all really important things that literally can be crafted ahead of time for an interviewee and for the interviewer.
Well, and as people are moving around from position to position, a lot of times we work in industries that may have small niches. So as they're coming back, we're probably seeing people that are interviewing again that may have relations with people at the organization, whether they're through competitive positions or maybe they've worked together at some place in the past. So when they've worked together, you have experience with Paul, and Paul's coming in to do an interview. What does Paul need to do to make sure that he can get past some of those maybe shortcomings from someone that knew him in the past, and can determine if this is going to be something that he can get past to reestablish that relationship?
The thought that comes to mind, I think, is to acknowledge. I would say something like, I've had a chance to work with some of you in the past, and I believe I added some value, but I also had some stumbling. And here's what I learned from that. And here's how that's showing up today. Here's how I have learned here's how I've learned, and here's what I'm doing differently. I think those two pieces, it's almost like when people need to apologize for something in the past, there's 3 things they need to do. I think I've shared this before, but they need to acknowledge it. They need to talk about, what do I need to do to make it right in that moment? And then what am I going to do different? So with a new group, and if there's still some people that have that residue, they do need to acknowledge that maybe they made some mistakes in the past. They don't have to throw themselves at the table and, on a sword at that moment, but they need to acknowledge it. But they need to let people know, here's what I learned from that, and here's what I'm doing different, so that you feel at least confident enough, like, oh, okay. Because you're trying to invest in someone. Making a choice, a hiring choice, is a big investment. And I want to see human growth potential. I don't want to see someone that's not learning and then it may repeat itself. And who has time for that?
Right. Well, and this is going to be a question out of left field, and you can share as much as you want about this, but I know you were working and I'm assuming it's with an organization. Weren't you recently in Alaska?
Yes. Yes.
And wasn't that, was that an organizational thing? I don't, it just, it's so far away. And I'm just wondering in terms of, obviously, there are organizations that can use your help there, but just tell us a little bit of the lead in to that, and just the group generally you were working with at that time.
Mm. Some of the work that I'm doing up in Alaska is I have a co-facilitator or partner, and she and I put on a 10-day leadership development program. So it's 2 days a month over 5 months, and we do coaching in between. And the predominant group right now are all nonprofit leaders. So they're in this borough. It's like, we call it counties down here in the lower 48, but it's called a borough up there. And it's huge. It's like the size of West Virginia or Virginia, something like that. And so we have all these nonprofits all over the place with different responsibilities. Some are working with children, others are working with the foster system, and some are working with offenders. I mean, just in homelessness and food. So you might think it's very disparate, and it's true, but we're trying to help them both with understanding new leadership disciplines, which includes, again, all strengthening relationships and understanding how to make movement in their organization, but how do they forge partnerships with others that may not seem like their organization, but they need to support each other in the work that they're doing. So that's really meaningful. And then I also work with an Alaska Native tribe further north in Nome, and doing some work with one of their particular branches. And that's pure leadership development, coaching, support, and that's also very, very meaningful because of the work that they're doing for their members.
When you're in North Westfall, it's not so far away.
No, it's only like 3.5 hours heading up. It's a treat.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's just, for an East Coast guy, it seems like it's way, way, way up there, and it's just intriguing. I mean, if I were to, I don't know, if I said that I went to Nova Scotia, that might be something where you go, what were you doing in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, right.
So I haven't had that experience yet, but I look forward to it at some point.
Oh, it's beautiful. Try to get there.
Well, and since you brought up Alaska, so let's talk about that, because it is a ways away from the lower 48. Mm-hmm. Some of the people who have been born or raised there have different cultures, different ways of doing things than people in other areas, just like it is in any part of the world. So as you're going and working with people up there versus people in the Northwest or the people in the Midwest, do you encounter different types of trust, different types of behaviors or whatever that you need to work on in order to help them to be able to build relationships as opposed to other parts of the country?
Mm. Yes. And I'm still learning with them, with these wonderful, leaders that I have the chance to partner with. I in this experience and how I'm immersing myself in the relationship, right, is very honoring of the culture, and really just inviting my Alaska Native colleagues to sort of lead the discussion in some ways. I don't want to come at it like I know, and this is a leadership model, or this is, a communications model, or whatever. I offer and see what's landing, and then invite them to comment on it. I think that my experience so far, and it's limited, but my experience so far with my Native colleagues is they're tired of the predominant culture telling them what to do, how to fix it, what might be wrong. And so I'm glad to work with these professionals, because I don't have that style. And I think that's one of the ways that I connect well, and I'm listening and I'm looking for ways to adapt, because it matters to me. So I'm having some of those direct conversations, and that's been really useful. I've been adjusting some of the ways in which I approach things. It's more of an offer, and see what lands. And I think that might be different the way some people might approach, like, I've got a recipe and I have found it works, so let's apply it. And that doesn't work in this particular case.
So is it always in the matter of inserting an increase in an organization's sense of trust, do you always come up against a little bit of the feeling of, but that's not the way we've always done it? Isn't that always a little bit of it? And I would think that these established groups, and again, it's not just the groups that you're working with in Alaska, but really this has relevance to everything that everyone is going through right now as things change. But these are established groups that have certain norms and certain relationships. There's always a bit of that pushback. Is that usually something that occurs that you have to mitigate in order to be able to take the necessary steps forward?
I would say I spent more time on that, Paul, before the pandemic. I think the pandemic has kind of blown some things up. It's blown up our paradigm of what it means to be successful outside the office. We've talked about that almost so much, but it's true. It's changed the way people get their work done. And so introducing a possibility of a change doesn't work. It does work. So it's been useful to. Sorry, someone just rang the doorbell and I'm trying to just. Okay. So during the pandemic, it invited people to really think about how they work together, and they had to turn on a dime, and it's still settling out, but it has introduced the possibility that they can do things different. And so it makes my job of trying to introduce some of that and counter that we've always done it that way, because I remind them, what have you done over the last 2 years? You have done a lot to shift that thinking. So having an anchor, having something to remind them that they have done it, makes the conversation a little easier. But then I approach it around, what are the core principles that they activated to make some of those changes happen? And what are the core principles also that needs to stay fluid and fluent and a part of the foundation in the new? And then they feel more comfortable. Oh, okay, we're still going to serve our customers, and responsiveness really matters, but the way in which we had designed that process has to be different. So when we do it this way, caring about our customer, being responsive, and delivering our product or service needs, we can do it. So it's just helping them identify those, and then the change is easier.
So to expand on that a little bit, in the past, when we all went to offices, we all worked together more. There was always team building exercises, finding ways to get people to be able to relate with one another, to know one another. As we move forward and maybe less working in the same place, do you see a positive and a negative, and how would you address it with, I'm not around people all the time, so I have less chance to get on their nerves, but I also have less chance to build that relationship with them. That kind of fine line of being together and not being together.
Yeah, human interaction is so important. I was talking yesterday. I'm doing some interviews with a team that is struggling with trust. And as I'm listening to everybody, and I'm sort of mapping out in a way the relationships, kind of mapping everybody on the team. And as I listen to them, are there strong relationships? Are there dotted lines between the relationships that either they don't know each other well enough, or they have some strain, or are there no relationships, either from a really big break or they haven't forged it? And they have a new supervisor, and this person has been there only about 6 months. And the one person that appears to be causing, according to others, right, causing grief in the group, is somewhat on an island, and there's really no connection to that person. And even that supervisor said the others have been coming into the office, and he's having this opportunity to forge relationships and get to know them, but the other person is choosing still to stay at home. And he admitted that he doesn't really know her very well. And he's actually asked, and this was before my conversation with him, but he asked her, says, I need you to come in at least 2 days a week. And she said, well, why? And he says, well, I need to build this relationship. It's important. And then he's also insisting that 1 day a week, everybody is in the office. And that's kind of what organizations are aiming toward. I think their vision of a hybrid is they're working through what that might look like. But having a day where at least, you touch people, in person, I think really make a difference. And it's clear, here's a group that hasn't had that, and here's a new supervisor, and he doesn't really know his team. He knows some of them, but not all.
And has the outcome still maintained that the one individual is being steadfast about staying remote and not coming in? This is something that's ongoing. Has there been any break in the ice there?
We'll have to wait and see, because it was only my conversation yesterday, and what he said is that when he explained the why, she was like, okay, so
Right.
maybe in a few weeks we'll have a sense about how that might play out. But it goes into there's just some basic parts of human DNA, and we feel safer in a group. We need to be parts of groups, and they need that. So you have to do something in particular to strengthen human connectivity, or you're not going to be effective. I mean, what's happening in the human system, it doesn't matter if you have the best automated process, you're delivering the best services, they will always be compromised if the human system is not working well. Always.
So is there a feeling of insecurity maybe about people shifting? We hear about people shifting careers, shifting jobs. That puts a dent in trust as well, because you invest in the people and then suddenly they make a pivot. And that's got to be a little difficult for an organization too, because there's always the thought, well, why is that person suddenly leaving an organization that I do trust? Why did they suddenly go? And you usually don't have the conversation with the person, why did you leave? Was it for more money? Was it for more clarity? Was it for just a better culture? You're kind of left with a lot of questions. Do you have, you obviously have to deal with the fallout from change too, in terms of trust. Am I correct about that?
I think, again, it's yes. And sorry to keep doing that, but I have a hard time with one answer. There are some organizations, Paul, that look at it from the organizational perspective, like, I've invested in you, I'm counting on you, and you're leaving. And they look at it from themselves and go, oh, what a bummer for us, right? Rather than looking at it like, if they're an organization that looks at development as a strength, then if I see a team member of mine moving on to another maybe part in my organization, that's awesome. Then the organization still won because we kept that person. If this person is leaving because they're clearer about themselves and they want to do something different or want to take their talent somewhere else, I should still look at that like that's okay. It depends on how they're leaving. If they're leaving because of, dissatisfaction or not feeling connected, or, I've tried to give my ideas, but you aren't listening to me, I don't feel like I matter here, then that's feedback for the organization to do something with. And it's good that the person goes. So I think how an organization handles that, what the messaging they give to the rest of the organization, saying, hey, Glenn is leaving because he has this great opportunity to build his own business. We know that he's got this immense talent and we've really enjoyed it over the years, and we wish him the best. I mean, you can do so much, and that might tell the rest of us, good, right? This organization has this benevolent side to them and that they care about others. Or if they don't say anything, and if there's grumbling about it, it's probably an indicator of something else happening in the group. And I may not want to stay in that kind of an organization either, if they just kind of don't really care much about people.
Yeah, well, that goes back to that comment. Remember, Glenn, when Tim Hagen was on the show, and you may have actually said it, but I just remember that episode. And the quote that I remember is, "Silence sends a message too."
Yeah, I think, if I'm hearing you, Wendy, having exit interviews and actually using that to, again, build or repair trust and identifying some maybe lapses of trust within your organization is becoming imperative. Because, like, I'm in Omaha, Nebraska this week, and I was just speaking with someone, and unemployment's about 1.6%. So when you have a low unemployment, you're probably going to have people poaching people from other companies maybe even similar companies. So if I'm leaving to go to X, Paul's leaving to go to Y, there is going to be some conversations, and really I guess, trust within the organization is going to be dictated on how the leaders handle that and how they address it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've been talking about for lack, I guess, of a better term, but using a very general term, the dysfunction that occurs when trust is not repaired or when trust is eroding. But give us some good news. Talk about a trust repair success story. Maybe you can frame it out for us. What were the objectives? What were the factors that caused this situation to occur? And then how did you guide this group or this organization to achieve a better trust outcome?
Thank you. I like sharing good stories. I think that we need them, especially right now, right? Yes. So what was neat about this particular story I want to share, and I might share two if there's time, but this first one was completely during the pandemic. I never got to meet them in person. So one, it sort of proved to me that it's possible, not always ideal, to not be in person. So it was a 6 or 7 member team. A leader, their leader was removed for a year and brought back. And there was a lot of uncertainty about why the leader was removed and and then when she came back. So she had her experience and felt betrayed by the organization. The team felt betrayed by the organization, and there was a couple of team members that had issues that needed to be sorted through. So that's a little bit of the background. So I was invited to come in to provide coaching and support to reintegrate the leader back to her team, but also to support, because I come in and say it can't just be from that perspective. The whole team experienced something, so we need to work with that. So part of my process is interviewing folks, getting what I call sound and current data. I just can't go in with one person telling me that was the story. And so I look for what are the pinch points in particular relationships, what are the themes that are emerging. So both I can work at the individual and interpersonal level, but also what can I design for the team? So I had coaching opportunities with this team leader. We worked through her experience, and then how she was bringing herself to these relationships and integrating back in the team. And she really wanted it to work. That's one of the things that I look for. Is there openness, and is there a desire to want to repair trust, to strengthen the relationship? And it was so clear to her. Everybody on the team, except for one, really wanted this relationship to work, and they were also stunned at the experience. So they were still, even after a year, they were somewhat in shock as well. So the one that had an issue, I knew that would be one of those interpersonal relationships that I needed to help with. But I also helped this leader with her boss. So individual coaching, I did some mediation so that they had private time to unpack what had happened, to make sense of it, to go through then the learning from that, which is the acknowledgement, and then seeing what they're going to do different, and just hearing each other in a safe place. And that was really transformational for that particular relationship. And I went through a couple of sessions with them. And then that emerged when I did work at the group level and gave them a chance. I would teach a little, but then let the group discuss it and learn from it and make their own new team norms. And we did particular learning pieces on how to have, how to engage in healthy feedback. Because there was this silence that was showing up. And there was silence even before this happened, because one person seemed to be having an issue, but the others didn't. And they were just doing their own thing. And all of a sudden, when you don't speak up, and it was just one of those messy things. So in the end, over the 5-6 months that I worked with them, the relationship between the two that was most strained, they had worked through it. In fact, at the very end, when I had an exit, we chose to connect with them at the very end in that mediation moment. And he said, and she said, both of them felt like the relationship was much stronger, that they had new ways of talking with each other. Because we talked very specifically about that. When things are going to go sideways, what are you going to do? So you kind of have to prepare in advance for when that happens. And that worked really well. And the team was in a much better spot. So that worked really well.
So that was when one person had an issue. What about if we take it to the next level and you have both sides having an issue? Paul and I don't trust each other and don't know how we're going to work through it.
Right. Well, yes, in a way that was between that supervisor and one of her team members. It really was struggling both ways.
Okay.
And I have that. Maybe that's part of this second example that I'm working with. It's an elected body, and the work that we do has to be done with the Open and Public Meetings Act. I mean, this talk about, trust is about getting to a level of vulnerability. And this has really been very tricky. And I'm only in the beginning stages with this group. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's a split, right, between two groups. And some of the things that had happened really are causing them to not really want to trust each other and work on that. And I thought, you don't know each other well enough. Can we do some of these beginning stages? I did the beginning thing of the interviews. I could see very clearly there's a chasm. The hard part around something like this is people will enter into some of these positions with a mindset of, this is how I need to be as an elected official. I need to be strong and tough, and I don't have to play with others. Mm-hmm. And when that shows up, we don't get to where we need to go. So we have to kind of paint the picture of why are you here and what are you doing this for? So if we can get them again to focus on the citizens that they're there to serve, and that they care very deeply about that, and that there's actually beauty in, can't we have healthy discourse? Isn't that what we want, so that we get better public policy? I must have said that like 10 times over the course of doing some of this. But we spent some time getting to know each other. I offered these different questions that they could tell different stories about maybe their leadership story or ways that they've had some experiences and how that shows up with how they are as a leader today. They had choices about what they answered. That helped. Then they spent time developing, they have their rules, right? And those people can get wound around the axle around rules. And I said, well, how do you want just to kind of work together? What are some of the operating principles? And let's not solidify that. Let's keep it fluid. And so they talked about that and just invited that everybody keeps everybody responsible for that and accountable. And then we did the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Let's have a little fun and learn that, wow, you actually can approach things differently, but no one instrument talks about the whole you. And they had that lightened things up. We did that on another day, and that was good. And then we spent time, there's a module that I share, learning from differences. And that really it's a beautiful thing. And we got to stop looking at it like it's a threatening thing, that we want to be curious about why somebody else is thinking what they're thinking, because those are the skills that we really need in that forum. And having spent time with that, the next day when they worked on their work plan, it went, I think, so much better. So the problem was, they don't know each other. They're coming in with the mindset of what it means to be an elected official, and they weren't willing to be vulnerable with each other. And they kind of took some of the things that you said and boom, so it wasn't, they didn't know how to have healthy dialogue. And I was just trying to penetrate that just a little bit. And so I only have just a little bit of time that I spent with that group, but I'll be coming back in a couple of months and doing it again.
Well, I know that politicians, in order to, it's an elected place. You have to be elected. So therefore, there's a sense of personality characteristics that are ambitious, definitely. There is a thread of wanting to help the greater good, definitely helping the citizens, and in varying amounts, I know. And there's also a competitiveness too that goes along with the ambition. Yeah. So how difficult is it to get a group like that, ambitious, competitive, seeing the big picture, wanting to make a big impact? How do you get them to trust you? And I have a second follow-up question, but how do you get a group like that to let down their guard just a little bit. And I think that your response will probably help our audience a little bit in their own attempts to regain trust in many different relationships, not just in a group that they're in, but maybe even some of their one-on-one relationships with someone who's very headstrong.
First thing that comes to mind, Paul, is I believe I'm a good listener. I believe I create good empathy and space for people to share what they want to share. I'm not quick to cut somebody off or to tell them anything about that. So I think that they experience non-judgment from me. And I do that also to create the beginning strands of trust together. My interviews with people in advance and my promise to them that what they share with me stays with me, and that I'm pulling out themes. And so when I bring them the information back, that's test number one. Did she say what she was going to do and honor that? And then what I do in those moments is I'm really tuning into what's important to you. See, sometimes I think where people go wrong is it's like I'm trying, I have an agenda or I have a model or I have something that I'm trying to fit your answers into this so that I can do what I wanted to do. And people can see through that. So I truly listen, and then and it changes then my design about what I bring back to the group. And I let them know, you see the design, this is your input into how this is. And then I try to just acknowledge with just some of my knowledge base, I try to acknowledge that they're coming in probably feeling kind of nervous, but I don't use those words. I just said, I know this isn't easy doing this, for example, in the public setting with Zoom and people paying attention, and the fact that it's going to live on YouTube forever and people can come back and watch this. You don't get that in other groups, right? But then I just acknowledge with just about everybody, this work isn't easy, but I always acknowledge we're all works in progress. And sometimes I share some of my own stories where they don't want a coach or a consultant or somebody to come in and make it sound like I've got the answer for you. And when you look back and you're like, have you ever done this yourself? Right? It's kind of messy. So I think that also strengthens trust because they see that I'm human and that I'm bringing not only wisdom, but where I've skinned my knees and messed up. And so I think that also helps in that journey. And I really give them a chance to talk.
Yes. And I've experienced that as a coach, the fact that on the one hand, many of the groups that I work with or the individuals, they want certainty and they want structure. But I have to let them know that this is a very customized thing. And you bring up an enormous point, which is the power, the impact of letting someone know they are being heard. Mm-hmm. That is such a powerful thing that if you do it right, you can leverage it in a good way to get the results you're looking for, to get the buy-in, the collaboration. Just based on that, it's such a powerful emotion.
It is. And sometimes people I think we all think that we're better listeners than we are. And so sometimes it takes someone from the outside, right? I mean, we're all guilty of that. I get it. We're so impassioned about wanting to share something. And so just to underscore your point, Paul, there was a moment in this retreat with two of these elected officials where it was during the Learning from Differences module that I was sharing. And one person said something like, well, I already know the way you think, Paul. And, he started describing that a little bit because I heard that on your campaign trail, and then he was going to go on. And, and Paul was like, and you could just totally see it on the face, but the other person really wasn't paying attention. So I paused and said, can we stop for a moment, right? And let's create some learning around this. So let me check in. And I checked in. I didn't want the other person to repeat what he was saying. And I checked in with the other person. So using your name, Paul, what are you thinking and feeling right now? What are you experiencing? Well, I didn't like that, he's making these assumptions. And I said, but what's the impact on you? Well, I didn't get my voice yet. I said, and what's the impact on you? Well, I'm angry that he's pigeonholing me into this space and doesn't even give me a chance for the thing. And so I wanted that to be heard. And I really believe it made a difference for that one elected official, because at the very end, when I do the checkout about what are you leaving the day with, what did you learn? And the word was, just really conscious about questions. It's important to ask questions and not make assumptions. And sometimes we just have to stop in those moments and then hear your voice. And that was good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So since we brought up politicians, and I'm going to stereotype, but there's a reason why stereotypes become stereotypes. So as we're talking to business owners with regards to leadership and learning how to communicate and build trust, what is your opinion about authenticity that we speak with quite often on this show? Because in my experience, a lot of times people running for elected offices lose a little bit of authenticity to be the role, to be the person that they're running for that position of.
Here's the one thing I think about politicians and politics. I think that it's practically impossible to be successful because we have unrealistic expectations of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody thinks that you go in and you are, let's just say pro seniors. And you can see that at any level. You can see it at the local level, state, federal, and tribal, everything, right? We're pro seniors. And maybe there's a lousy piece of legislation or city law or whatever is coming forward. And you're like, no, I'm going to vote against that. The way it's written, it's not good public policy. But then others can say, well, see, Wendy, you aren't for seniors. That was a senior bill. And and it's really frustrating to be successful. So that's one piece I wanted to share. That whole authenticity piece is, there's this piece where I want to know that you're hearing me, and they may say, yes, I might go in and work with a particular constituent group. And, as a politician, they might be saying, yes, what you say is important. And this is important. It's if they're in that moment promising things, right? If they promise certain things to happen, well, we don't have control over the happen, but you can promise advocacy. So I think that that's a nuance that's really important that I think we feel let down. I think sometimes we want to hear that they're going to vote a certain way. And I think that that's also really unrealistic, because I want a leader who's an elected official who's going to go in and they're dealing with complexity. And I want to know that they're learning and that they're listening to experts that come in. And I might have come in with a particular mindset. And then once I've learned a little bit more, I might be maybe clearer about you saying yes to that, or I might even change and say, boy, based on all this new information, I'm not sure we can go in that direction. And it's in that point where people feel the unauthentic, if that information isn't shared well with people on the outside, we just lump them into saying whether they're changing their mind and they're inauthentic. And I think that's wrong. So I think all of us, not just politicians, I think all of us need a mindset shift, because I want people to be able to learn and to really engage in good conversations. This is why you need everybody at the table. This whole idea of having one particular agenda is really unhealthy. So public policy should really be debated in a way that you invite ideas and you let it inform you and you let it shift your work on those actual words that they put into law.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point in a more general sense, the idea of expectations and disappointments. And one of the things that I'm famous for saying on a personal level is my biggest challenge in life is managing my disappointments. So in terms of trust repair, what advice would you give to anyone who has a good idea to do this, but gets pushback and is disappointed by what the results are at first? And I realize it requires a lot of patience. Often, in order to do this well, and I don't want to make this sound like a plug for what you do or what Glenn does or what I do, but isn't it great to have somebody who is not emotionally invested in the trust repair? In other words, kind of like a referee, like you, where you go, time out, hold on. I see. If I had a yellow flag, I would have thrown it. Something that needs to be fixed. that seems like it's something that allows everyone the freedom to follow through without a knee-jerk response that stops the conversation, the feedback, the collaboration, all of those things.
I believe that it's helpful. I think it's why people have sought out counselors for years. I mean, partnerships, relationships, right? Sometimes they get to a place where they need marital counseling or spousal or just partnership counseling. I think that we can all get stuck, and we might have a skill set that we think we can get unstuck, but sometimes you need someone else to be listening to it. You need us both, because we both have triggers by that point, and we're pushing them with each other. And groups do that, organizations do that. So there is value in having a neutral person or party group that can help them work through it. You can find that sometimes in their own organizations, and sometimes they need someone from outside. And I think all of that should be available to people. I think it's been really useful. And I'll say that, I'm having to practice what I preach. There's a group that, a service organization that I said yes to being the president this year. There's some internal dynamics that I'm not making much of a headway on. And I'm laughing at myself going, I got to pull myself out of this. And how would I coach myself? And then I think, okay, how do I activate and bring somebody in to help us have the conversation, because I'm wrapped up in it too. So I think that we're all there at different times. Not that you have to have someone always who provides that neutral place, but it's helpful.
I think it's always interesting, again, whether it be a work environment, a voluntary environment, to sometimes take a breath, take a step back, and evaluate things, and then maybe come at it maybe from a different approach or a different aspect, depending on who the groups are, especially when you're in this group that maybe 20%, 30% of it changes year after year, because what worked this year with group A may not work as well next year with group B. What's your experience been with that?
Yes, I think you're right, Glenn. There's times, well, I mean, it's true. You see, time and conditions change. Nothing is ever static. And because we live in a dynamic, well, we all are, it's always dynamic. We're always changing. Groups are always changing. Relationships are always changing. So I think that just like we put maintenance on our cars, but we make sure that we give it the lube oil filter, and we, sometimes it needs more maintenance than other times. I wish we did that more with groups and relationships. Sometimes we need, healthy resets and time spent. And again, in my study that I did for my doctoral research, that was one of the things, it was one of the 6 points that set groups apart that were able to repair trust from those that didn't. And that was if they had some shared learning together. So, that's part of that lube oil filter. They didn't need to use it then, but then at some point down the road, when relationships became strained and trust was at stake and all of that, then they had a similar experience where they pulled out their workbook on crucial conversations, and they muddled through it and started to make a difference, which was great. So it doesn't have to be Wendy's model. It could be any number of models, right? And sometimes groups say, well, I learned a little bit about how to speak clearer, right, from Paul, and maybe some work from Glenn, and they pull that all together, and it helps them. But that's only if groups sort of invest over time in the development of their team.
I wrote that down, Paul. I'm going to steal that. A little relationship maintenance. Sometimes you need an oil change. Sometimes you need new tires. Sometimes you need a complete overhaul.
It's true, but we all experience that, where if a group or an individual has gone through extensive training, whatever that time element might be, there is a sense of, okay, I've got this. But in reality, everything is fluid, and everything requires a certain amount of maintenance. And I just had the thought that when we look at things like that, when we look at trust as being something that it is a fragile thing, though it can be made stronger, isn't the worry about things potentially falling apart detrimental to trust as well? I'm thinking this all the way through, probably overthinking, as my wife would say, but just that seems like it would be another thing to kind of worry about. But maybe if you had the foresight to schedule in a certain amount of maintenance, maybe look for the signs along the way. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a slippery slope though, because then you're kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. I don't know. Is this all bringing about experiences that you've had in your work, Wendy?
Here's one analogy, right? I think organizations that spend time focusing on their customers, focusing on customer satisfaction, understanding what their customers want and that they're responsive to that, and they work really hard to meet that. My hope is that they do the same work internal into their organizational systems.
Right.
Same kind of thing. What data do you have that tells you about the health and wellness of the organization? And some use employee satisfaction surveys. I think that organizations give you feedback all the time. You can walk down a hall and you can see, are people talking? Now, I know we're pandemic kind of coming out and not everybody is in the hall or working. You can still get a sense on Zoom whether what the dialogue is like, and in some cases it's gotten worse, right? In some cases it's gotten better, because we have the ability to be a little bit more mindful about who's got the microphone, right? And so there's intentionality around collecting sound and current data from your own group and from your own organization, and then what are you doing about that? And you can watch data over time about several employee satisfaction levels, and are you tending to that? Just like we would, you get the maintenance minder on your cars, and just like if they're doing it really well with external with their customers and stakeholders, we need to do the same inside. And then do something about it. There was one of the jobs that I had, it was a large state agency, and I was going in to lead their continuous improvement efforts. That's what we call Lean Six Sigma today, and a little bit of organization development. And it turned into more OD because I thought it's more than just that. So they would bring in all of their leaders across the state for this 2-day learning, event. And it was all about the content of the business. And I thought, you're bringing them in, let's do some leadership development. Let's do something around teams. Let's help them build relationships. So I took and advocated for that, and they were open to it. And you could see how, and I was there 8 years, and it made a difference. There has to be a place for both content, but also how the organization is doing things and how it's learning. And we weaved in conversations around strategic planning and continuous improvement and organization development. And it was just really good stuff. And it's like, we got to have balance. If you have a staff meeting every week, and if they don't spend any time on the relationships, then they're focusing on, I think, it's like you got to dial it. You have a full dial. If you do 100% just coming in with the agenda, focusing on stuff, and you don't even give people a chance to get their voice in the room, that's not healthy.
Interesting. Go ahead, Glenn.
I was just saying, what comes to mind is with relationships, as other things, there's always movement and there's always motion. If you're not proactively moving it forward, it's probably moving in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I'm really, this is interesting because I've used this term before in regard to the work that I do, or the things you should be doing this. And I call it, reminding people to eat their vegetables. So how do you sell to a group this idea, we need to do this work? Because actually talking about content or new ideas or new initiatives, it's exciting. It can be exciting to a group, but talking about something that already exists that you kind of feel, shouldn't it all be there? And do I have to really engage? Do I have to be transparent? I mean, come on, how do you sell that beyond just, we really should be able to do this? Is there a colorful way of bringing that about? Is there a carrot that can be dangled?
There's a couple of things that I use, but first I'm listening to that person and finding out what influences them. So some people are influenced by data and performance measures. And so I might ask them, how much time are they spending on meetings that aren't working very well, and the communication that flows back and forth afterwards going, now, what did they say? And I didn't think I was supposed to be doing that, or other kinds of things. So first, I'm trying to get them to tune into some metrics that they may not be paying attention to. And I said, and what does that equal to? And they're probably pretty smart, and they can figure out, well, that's lost time equals lost money, rather than building it into and getting our work done. So if they're influenced by data and performance, I'll talk about that. Sometimes they're influenced by, we're trying to do this important work. And then I might say, and what is the current situation? Is that helping you toward that, or is that getting in the way? So first, I want them to do the diagnosis, both in terms of either numbers or their ability to get that work done. Then I introduce a couple of things that might stimulate their thinking. I like the Google study that was done there on their Aristotle project, and some of the highlights from that particular project where, psychological safety was paramount, giving groups and people a chance to really get to know each other was paramount. And all of these things they found was, critical. And then some things that were just important. And so I want them to say there's data and there's study, and sometimes, using that name because it's a brand that people respect and understand, they may go, oh, okay, because they might be influenced by what are others doing. And then I have a quote that I like to use that say the quality and productivity of any system is in direct relationship to the quality and productivity of the relationships within that system. So if you're going to get any work done, how are the relationships? And if the relationships are strained and unhealthy, then you're not really activating everything you can to get your work done. So I use those as kind of like lead-ins, and we'll just see where it goes from there.
Wow. Brilliant stuff. Basically, Wendy is she's tapping into each individual's or each group's with them. What's in it for me? and really using active listening to determine what that solution could be based on the guidance you give. Mm-hmm. Amazing insights today, Wendy. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for joining us, Wendy. It's always been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure as always. If someone want to reach out and contact you, what would be the easiest way to do so?
Mm-hmm. I'm on LinkedIn. They can find me at Wendy Fraser, PhD. And they can also go to my website, and there's a way to find me, and that's wendyfraserconsulting.com. So I'm happy to connect with people and talk more about any of this.
Great to have you again, Wendy. Really, it's always a pleasure, and we're going to be asking you back in the future.
I appreciate being here. It's such a treat to connect with the two of you. I love your questions and I love the dialogue. So thank you for the work that you're doing as well. I think it's really important.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Everyone, we'll see you at the same time, same places next week. Take care, everyone.